कि how do you get into this role? Because if I am a, imagine my college में अभी, so what exactly is a developer advocate? What exactly does a developer advocate do? क्योंकि मुझे भी नहीं पता है honestly. Like directly from college, he became a developer advocate with Appwrite. Now I remember, I have seen people, they are traveling a lot. I've seen you also travel a lot. So what is up with the traveling part? Because even I like to travel. So should I become a developer advocate? I can call it another career
Huh.
path for software
It's an
developers, right?
alternative career path. Yes.
So hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have with us Aditya Oberai, who is going to tell us all about what is a developer advocate. Okay, what exactly does a developer advocate do? And this is an alternate career path for a software engineer. So अगर आप एक software engineer हैं and आपको कुछ अलग करना है, so this is a very cool path. What do they do? You know, what is the average salary, that also we can discuss, and a lot of other things, and how to get into this, because Aditya got, like, directly from college he became a developer advocate with Appwrite. So hello Aditya, welcome to the channel.
Thanks a lot, Amisha. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. It's really good to be here with you all today.
So first of all, let me introduce Aditya. So he's currently a developer advocate with Appwrite. He graduated from Amity University. So he did his BTech from Amity University in 2022. And apart from that, he's also a Tweelab. He's got almost 40K followers, 39K. And he's also been a Microsoft MVP and a CMX Community Professional of the Year 2024. So great achievements there, Aditya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, let's start with the most pressing questions. What exactly is a developer advocate? What exactly does a developer advocate do? क्योंकि मुझे भी नहीं पता है honestly.
Yeah, अच्छा सवाल है. And I think so. When I talk about what developer advocacy, or rather the umbrella developer relations is, I think हल्की सी ना history में घुसना पड़ता है. So I think for this, man, is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions instead of you asking me? I think it'll be nice to turn around the tables here for a second.
Sure,
And
sure.
chalo, let's do one thing and let's go back 15 years behind in time and think about what tech was 15 years back, what companies in tech were around. Do you think 15 years back there were a lot of companies that had products or services catered specifically to developers?
Not really, because in general, I think
गिने
software
चुने
in
थे,
general.
है
True.
ना? Like Microsoft was there, whether that is for Visual Studio, .NET, things like that. Apple had some stuff. Very few companies though, right? Whereas let's look at the scenario today.
Hmm.
एक तो we can lose count of how many database companies are around. There are enough. Enough developer tools around, enough products which are catered just for developers, right? The one big thing about any company that is catering to developers, or rather, one thing about developers as a customers is that developers interact with organizations in a very different manner. There's a different kind of skepticism, a different kind of cynicism, for good reason, right? Because for developers, more than the fluff, what matters is performance कैसा है, under the hood चीजें सही है नहीं सही है, privacy, like the privacy things like that. There's a lot of things there. But the thing is, what all of these companies have realized is if they want to cater to developers, work with them, understand them, they need someone who can walk in the same shoes. And that is where developer relations comes from. It
Okay.
is basically a domain that makes sure that a developer focused company can work with developers, communicate with them, bridge that gap between this kind of customer and the product itself. And so maybe conventional companies, you will have people around PR teams, sometimes marketing handles that, product teams handle that. But with developer focused companies, you need people who can walk in the same shoes. So it needs to be someone who can both develop and communicate. And that's kind of what brings DevRel into the picture, or that is the short form for developer relations, as we call it.
Okay.
And so that way, when I talk about what I do as a developer advocate, since my company's primary customer is developers, So I work a lot on some of our community initiatives. I work a lot on educational content and blogs that help teach about how to build with Appwrite. I help give back to our SDK tooling, make sure that we're getting the appropriate feedback from developers, helping solve their problems, and so on.
Okay. So that is fine. Now, what is the difference between developer relations, developer advocate, developer evangelist? There are so many terms. So इसका क्या मतलब
That
होता है
is
exact?
true. So when we say developer relations, we can look at it as an umbrella term. है ना? जैसे software engineering is an umbrella term. उसके अंदर someone's going to be a web developer, someone's going to be firmware, someone's going to be DevOps or cloud or infrastructure. There's a lot of things, right? So similarly, developer relations is an umbrella. You've got developer advocates. There are developer evangelists. They are similar terms, by the way, and a lot of the skill set overlaps. In the past, some of these were more finely defined. आज थोड़े से lines blurry हो गए हैं. But then there are more distinct roles as well. Like for developer products, community manager could come under developer relations. Technical writers would come under that. In some cases, developer marketers also come under that. Now, to some extent, companies do get a little more liberty here to define these roles as they would, because um, it's still a domain at its nascent stage. It's been around for a while. 20-25 साल से Apple and Microsoft have had um, people on these roles from before I was born. But as a domain, it is still very, very nascent. It is still much smaller than a lot of other ones. So companies do tend to bend those definitions a little, but you'd see these terms come up anyway. And for the most part, these terms would fall under developer relations as an umbrella.
Okay, okay. ठीक है. काफी बातें हो गई. अब सबसे मुद्दे की बात पे आते हैं. The main question
Okay.
कि how do you get into this role? Because if I am a, imagine मैं college में अभी, how do I get into this given I don't have any expertise?
So the first thing to keep in mind, and okay, by the way, as a disclaimer, everything I say going forward from here is experiential, so take with a pinch of salt. That is an advice for everyone in the audience. But if you're purely inexperienced, developer relations is not a domain you should look at. The reason I'm going to say so is I'm going to now break down some of the core skills you need as a developer relations professional, like a developer advocate. Um, when we talk about DevRel teams, most commonly they're going to be seen in developer-focused products, which tend to follow some sort of a community-led growth model. Sometimes that won't be the case. There are B2B companies where you will see these as well. But on a general level, we will see community-led models for a number of these companies. Okay. Which means, as we said earlier, you need to be someone who's a developer and you need to be someone who can communicate. But you also need to be someone who can navigate communities, manage and support them. As a developer, there are a number of ways we know how to build our skills. But when we talk about someone who's like a dev advocate, you need to be a good enough developer to the point where you can understand your product, go to the depths of it, discuss those challenges. Like there, of course, is a lot of width of experience involved. Maybe maybe you won't need to be a day-to-day engineer, but you need to be good enough at least to go down and understand and be able to experiment and work across a wide range. The time taken to get till that point could vary from product to product, as well as an individual's own skill commitment. But at least, unless you have some amount of alternative experience, whether through internships, whether through contractual work, whether through hackathons, or you indie hacking, it's difficult to build that sort of a skill. I got lucky that way because my company is an open source company, so I still get to work on a lot of code and I've contributed back to our product. But that may not always be the case. So you will need some amount of skill as a developer, maybe at least 1 to 3 years before it becomes easy to kind of do that. You can do that alternatively in college. Some companies today do accept that, some may not. Secondly, as a communicator, the biggest places where you're communicating with your customer base is either through your community or that is going to be via content, right? Now that could be written content, that could be video. Those are the two most common. I won't get into audio-based content just yet. But when we say content there as well, right? Um, Now I write a lot of blogs for Appwrite. So when I do technical blogs, I need to be able to work on demo applications, create something like that, then work through a step-by-step tutorial or a how-to. And that's going to be one side of it. Then at times I also work on content, which isn't directly a product work through, but I may work on adjacent tech topics. And like if I'm talking about authentication, for example, I've worked on some content around password hashing, or I worked on some content around passwordless authentication or social media auth and its pros and cons. Now, unless I understand those paradigms, technically, though, you need to do that for sure. But also, then you need to have enough command of language and enough skill writing or creating that you can actually explain that in a simple enough manner to people beyond yourself, right? So you need a good command of your languages. And in most cases, that's going to be English. Sometimes there are regional roles, but that is still a rarer case. For the most part, English is good enough there. But if you're not comfortable writing and communicating on a very regular basis with a lot of people, that could be something to think about. And then, of course, there is the community side of it. Now, if a company is large enough, chances are the community programs they have will have their own teams. But for smaller teams, it becomes a shared responsibility. So I know for a fact at Appwrite, any events processes we have are going to go through me, which means if I'm working on events processes or if I'm working on certain programs, like our Heroes program, that is something I manage. I need the ability to kind of plan out a strategy for these programs. I need the ability to manage people, work with different stakeholders, whether they're members, partners, externally from the company, people within the company, coordinate across different teams. And so, when you start kind of breaking into those depths, it's a very, very versatile role, and it is very fluid as well for that matter. And uh, these three paradigms that I mentioned, whether that is code, content, and community, even if you're not an expert of all three, it's good to ideally be an expert of at least one of these. But even if you're, as long as you're an expert of one of these, you still are going to need some amount of experience on both of those other sides. Otherwise, surviving the role becomes very difficult. It might be a little easier to manage when a company is very large. Like, for example, if we're talking Microsoft's cloud advocacy team or Google's developer relations engineers, it's a very different story. Those are companies big enough where you will get very siloed roles. Like, for example, Google may harness me right now. Their DevRel engineers are very often focused on documentation and developer experience. That is a big part of their responsibility. But when you come to smaller companies, चाहे वो Appwrite है, चाहे it's another database company like Terso, for example, or any other product. Like, I mean, there are enough developer tools out there today. They don't have the luxury of hiring big teams, which means you need to have a multitude of skills. And that's not just to get in, but that's also just to even survive in the role. So unless you feel comfortable across all of these paradigms, rethink. Don't rush towards them, because that is becoming more and more of a problem right now.
What was your journey? Like, how did you start from college and how did you go into Appwrite? Like, thoda sa brief me, I would like to know.
Huh. So for me, I think I just kind of started college experimenting a lot. First hackathon I was involved in organizing was first year. By the time second year happened, I started getting involved in community programs like the Microsoft Learn Student Ambassadors and things like that. So I started actively speaking and doing technical talks. I started actively working on blogs. I started participating in hackathons, which means I was doing a lot more projects and I was putting them out there. By the time second year ended, COVID hit. We all went virtual. But because that happened, I kind of bended the rules a little bit. So online class chal rahi hai, but I was also doing internships at the same time. So I did a community management internship with ProGate for 5 months. I then returned to them to actually intern for 2 more months as a user researcher, focusing on UX and product strategy. I did a software developer internship after that as a backend developer at Tech Dome Solutions. It's a consultancy in Indore, and I spent a couple of months as a .NET developer on the backend. Still one of my favorite stacks, by the way. I know people are not big when they talk about .NET, but it's still very close to my heart. So just a shout out there. I was also doing a lot of hackathons. So smaller hackathons and then big ones like Imagine Cup. Um, I worked on projects for a lot of those, which helped me continuously grow my skills. I also, at the same time, parallelly was contracting with Major League Hacking as a hackathon coach. So I was actively further involved with their community, spending time in hackathons, um, helping mentor, and doing a lot of technical speaking. So I was doing long technical live coding workshops and things like that. And all of these actually kind of helped me hone these skills. So by the time third year ended, I hadn't decided I wanted to do DevRel by the time third year ended, but because I was experimenting so much and I'd done a lot of these things already, I had happened to develop a relevant skill set that would help me for the domain. So third year ended, चौथे साल में placement का stress होता ही है सबको. So I still sat for on-campus placements. I was doing a few interviews there, but July I applied to Appwrite, July and August start. I had my interviews through August, and by the time fourth week of August happened, I had an offer in hand. Because with Appwrite, they took into account all of this work in the past. It was considered valid experience because we were doing large scale stuff. Like I remember 2020, 21 around, a few of my friends and I, we did a hackathon virtually, which had over 8,000 registrations. Like I think even today, it's probably among the largest student-led hackathons that has ever happened. So we were doing big stuff for sure. And because I was very publicly vocal about my work, whether that is projects, hackathons ke mere sare projects abhi bhi mere GitHub pe, all of that was visible. So it allowed me to demonstrate like that width of experiences when I was applying. So even along with Appwrite, I know there were a couple of other companies where I interviewed for their developer relations roles, and Appwrite's interviews went the quickest. Plus, I think it's also just the product I felt the most interested in, which I think is another important aspect for anyone in DevRel. If you don't care about the product you're catering, you're not going to survive working at that company. Like you have to understand it, and you've got to be that user zero first before you can even talk about it anywhere else, right? So things just worked out for me on that front, but there was a lot of work that happened before that. Uspe I've actually written a blog already. That's on my dev.to right now. So I can probably share a link for that. Would help.
Okay. I'll also share the link in the description, so do check that out. What other companies are like there? Matlab, developer relations roles are open in like almost which companies, and are they open in like almost all companies, or how is it?
So the way I would look at it is any company which has a product that is sold to developers will probably require someone on developer relations. है ना? चाहे वो conventional developer tooling में like databases and IDs and stuff. JetBrains, for example, is a very good developer relations team. Chahe you look at API companies like Twilio. Twilio's been very, very big. They've had one of the best developer relations teams historically. Cloudflare and all have great teams. But so also, if you go beyond that, Cloud Native tech has some very good DevRel professionals in that industry. Hosting companies, Vercel has had fantastic DevRel people. So any basically product which can be sold to developers would probably need someone in DevRel. And in some way, Web3 has had people, AI has people, Cloud Native has people, conventional databases and so on. So anything that can be sold to developers basically.
So अभी ये बताओ कि for these roles, developer advocate or developer relations, and how is it compared to the software engineer, जो typical software engineer role होता है?
Good question. So normally when we talk about DevRel calendar role, so I will say this specifically in the context of developer advocates. And this is because technical writers, community managers sometimes have different pay structures. because I don't work there professionally. मेरे लिए थोड़ा सा comparison मुश्किल होगा. But for most good companies, at least, their DevRel teams the pay is going to range anywhere between 70-75% to an exact match with their software engineers. Um, it does range at times. The reason that happens is because A, slightly different skill set, B, because it's not necessarily an entry level role. So the lowest pay might be a little higher than what you hear sometimes. As you keep growing, there's a little variance though. So, I mean, I've seen decent roles around India, good companies. You're going to start seeing pay structures with at least an in hand from 8, 9, 10 LPA onwards. Um, if the company is too small, you might see something a little smaller. But then at that point, you'll probably have other perks, like equity is going to be higher and things like that. So वो थोड़ा vary हो जाते हैं. And I will say at that point, it's going to be important to look at how the role is structured. So if, for example, your role requires you to stay closer to the tech, it's going to see a similar part to software engineering. The lesser that becomes, the more variance occurs. But typically, I mean, if it's a balanced role where you're getting enough tech, enough community and content on the Sara, so it'll be very, very similar to software engineering salaries.
So yeah, so that is a good thing that you mentioned the reality. Like some people are like कि ये इस role में घुस जाओ and there's a lot of money. So I think that depends on your skills for any role. मतलब ऐसा
वो
नहीं.
तो होता है. And actually दूसरी चीज क्या हो गई थी ना बीच में. So a lot of times, a lot of companies that I refer to, for example, dev tooling companies, a lot of them aren't Indian companies. Now, the moment it's a smaller team or a foreign company, chances are, because pay structures of other companies and the kind of investment they have or the kind of customers they have are different, it might seem like you're making more money. Right. That of course brings with itself its own challenges. मतलब उतना कमा रहे हो तो उसका फिर deliver भी करना है. And so I know for a fact there are people who kind of jumped to those roles and then crashed out as well very early because वो नहीं handle हो पाया.
Makes sense. ठीक है. So अब if you are comparing international offers and of course salaries in
हाँ,
India.
exactly. वो फर्क पड़ ही जाएगा, है ना? But I mean with DevRel in general, I think the biggest thing is a lot of people and a lot of students at least have been attracted by this factor. मतलब वो travel दिखता है, ये दिखता है, वो दिखता है. That is not the regular reality.
Let me ask you a question now. Now I remember. I have seen people, they are traveling a lot. I've seen you also. You also travel a lot. So what is up with the traveling part? Because even I like to travel. So should I become a developer advocate? How does it go?
Don't become a dev advocate if you just like traveling. सबसे पहली चीज, when we go to a conference, उसमें जो घिसना पड़ता है, it is a crazy amount of effort. Like people don't realize it looks nice in photos. It is some of the roughest work period we also see. And the reason I say it's that rough is because, अच्छा, अभी normal कहते हैं, हमें कोई event गया दिखे जाए, fun है. We can talk to people because it's nice to do. When you go there for work, think of networking becoming a business requirement and having a quantified outcome attached to that. Whether that is lead generation, whether that is partner development, whether that is feedback, it changes the way you kind of look at it entirely. And so it seems fun, but it is very, very rough. And on top of that, suppose I'm traveling for a conference, it's going to screw up my work schedule. It's going to screw up my sleep schedule. I don't have my regular working environment around. Now, some people don't mind that. But for most people, I think I will say, at least for me, I feel more comfortable if I'm in my regular work environment. That becomes very difficult when you're traveling. And so it seems a lot shinier than it actually is. Not gonna lie, I still enjoy it a lot. I really like meeting a lot of those people. I love doing this. But that isn't to say that everyone will. And it's just not as glorious as it looks. Plus, some teams will have a little more travel. Not a lot of teams will. Like for me, I'm going to travel outside India maybe anywhere between 1 to 3 times a year. उनमें से एक तो इसलिए हो जाता है because we're a remote team, we're globally distributed, so we try and do an offsite at least once a year where we can all catch up. But other than that, travel is not a regular part of my work. And honestly, I'm happy it's not a very big part, because a consistent work environment for me, at least, it's somewhere where I feel a little more stable. वो हो जाता है, मतलब it takes a physical toll more than anything else. So हिम्मत उड़ जाती है थोड़ी.
Final question. We are in 2024. So, what do you think is the best path to become a developer advocate if someone wants to be a developer advocate today in 2024?
So, when we look at the same core skills around code, content, and community, my advice is build experiences on all three fronts before you even think about applying for a developer advocate role. There are two reasons for this. एक तो थोड़े टाइम कंसिस्टेंटली करोगे तीनों चीजें तो समझ आएगा कि तीनों पहली बात तो संभाल सकते हो या नहीं एंड करना चाहते हो या नहीं. दूसरी चीज, for a lot of people, what happens is they're going to try one of these three and they realize that they enjoy one of them so much that maybe that's a direction they want to make a career in, right? Someone who just writes building so much that maybe they just want to be a software engineer full time. Or, they just are fond of community so much, maybe they want to be a community manager full time. So it is better to try all three before you jump the gun and pick one and, pick developer advocacy. There are ways to do it. As a developer on code, you can either do that professionally. I do recommend doing it for a while professionally. You can also do it in alternative manners, whether that is through freelance work, whether that is through open source, doing a lot of projects. But when I'm saying projects, I don't mean like to-do list bana diya. Matlab something that can actually be put out there. Enough to the point where at least the tech you're working with, you have some opinion on it. Matlab, more than a tutorial. So इतना तो होना ही चाहिए. And with writing or speaking, run your own blog, run your own channel for a while, do technical content, like proper technical content. The reason I say so is because that's probably what you will be doing a lot when you do go full time on that job. And thirdly, communities, helping manage, helping organize, volunteering, things like that. And so, it's only once you've done all of that and you've thought about whether you actually like this or not, should you make a decision. If you're even 10% or 5% unsure, like you're 90% there, but not 100%, don't go for developer advocacy. The reason is, once you jump in, it's very difficult to go back to a more technical career path. Like software engineering karke, DevRel ki taraf jana hai is still easier because the technical skills get retained. And even in DevRel, you still need to maintain and sustain technical skills. And it's everything else on top of that alongside. But अगर वो foundation में technical skill नहीं है या वो interest नहीं है, वो survive ही नहीं कर पाते, है ना? It's easier to go that way later on than come back to software engineering. That becomes more difficult because in DevRel, you're probably not going to be doing engineering work day to day. Some cases, very rare cases, it might happen. Most cases, it won't. Like I have stints. There are days and weeks when I'll focus on certain projects, I'll work on samples. It does happen. But that's not going to be every day. So, अगर लगता है कि मतलब sure नहीं है and you want a safer path, software engineering is a better way to go. At least until you build a lot of that context and you build that interest, and then you later on take a call.
Cool. So one important thing is build in public. Another important thing is just don't jump into developer advocacy to avoid coding. कि coding नहीं करनी पड़ेगी तो घुस जाते हैं.
ऐसा होता ही नहीं है. Like लोगों को लगता है कि dev advocates don't need to code. That is just not possible. Because मतलब सिंपल बात है. If I'm catering to developers और मैं वही नहीं समझ पाया कि वो फंस कर रहे तो मैं क्या समझाऊंगा? है ना? I need to be able to dive in and understand those problems. If I can't understand, I can't do anything about it.
So lastly, before going, Aditya has written a lot of blogs. So one of them is Everyone Can Do DevRel, but should they? So ये कितना interesting title है. So do read these. What does a DevRel do? And what is the difference between developer advocacy, relations, etc. So काफी सारे blogs I'll link them in the description. I'll also link Aditya's LinkedIn in the description so you can check that out. His Twitter handle, probably send him a message. So with that, thank you so much, Aditya, for coming. I truly enjoyed the session and I'm pretty hopeful that this will clear a lot of myths जो college students को होते हैं कि करना चाहिए नहीं करना चाहिए.
Thanks a lot, everyone. It was great joining in, chatting here, and as Amisha mentioned, My socials are going to be in the description, so feel free to ping.